Awake living into uncharted territory together, accelerating your wellness path, plus your interconnectivity at the same time. It's not your grandma's Ayurveda, but it kind of is. It's the Yoga Healer Real Life Show with Kate Stillman.
Hello, it's Kate Stillman with YogaHealer.com, and today I had the absolute pleasure of talking with Stryker of parayoga.com, P-A-R-A yoga.com. He's the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom, based on the 4 aims of life from ancient yogic teaching. For the past 35 years, Rod has dedicated his life to improving lives of others through his lectures and writing and creativity and leadership, his service, and his family life. I know of Rod through members in yoga health coaching who've come in through being para yoga instructors. And so it's really fun for me to have the chance to connect with Rod. And in today's talk, we've dived deep into Dharma, what's happening in the brain with Dharma and the intersection of the worldly path and the yogic path and what starts to happen, and why yogis have an awesome advantage in the worldly life if we can put our yogic powers to the worldly tests. That's a lot of what goes on in today's show. You are stoked that you are here. Just a quick announcement before we begin. So I am taking 50 people into a deep dive dream journey over the next 8 months in the Awake Living course, where you actually get way more clear on your Dharma in the next chapter of your life, in reality, and making things happen in real time. You up-level all 5 elements of your physiology, including the subtler elements of air and ether, meaning your space, your time, your flow, your money, your vision, and your body. If that sounds good to you and you want to be one of those 50, you better hustle on over to yogahealer.com/awake living, AWAKELIVING, and check it out. So yogahealer.com/awake living. Watch the full video, apply, and you'll talk to one of my people and you might get in. All right, that's the scoop. On to Rod Stryker.
My friend and student, Sarah Hutchinson, you've worked with her, I think, right?
Yeah, she was in my Living Ayurveda course years and years ago, and then I had a mentoring course which helped people with the business side of being a self-employed yogi, helping spread.
I think it made a huge difference in her life and her agenda and her ability to share her wisdom. Yeah, I think you really did. I think you had a big impact in her.
Awesome. Well, I know you've had a huge impact on many people. It was funny when I went to search in all my messages and I put your name in, like all of these people came up referencing you as their teacher. So we definitely have an amazing intersection happening, which is it's fun to cross-pollinate.
So we've not met before then, Kate.
Well, no, we have. You were in part of my Winter Traditions course, and we talked about kids and holidays and
that's right,
materialism, and that was years ago, and that's where we left off. So it's cool because I'm writing this book right now on Awake Living. It's based on like the 5 elements and awakening people to Dharma, and then as a chapter by chapter sequence of their life. And it's cool to see in your book, The 4 Desires, how purpose is front and center. So can we just start by talking a little bit about, for the Westerners among us, who are probably most of the people listening, who are raised in more of a materialistic paradigm, this, just what happens when we pursue materialism at the expense of pursuing purpose?
Well, it's a huge subject, a great one, and really kind of maybe a cornerstone of the work I do. In essence, what we need to acknowledge is fundamentally that we all are living on 2 tracks. And there's the track of being more successful in the world, which speaks both to our finances, our relationships. It speaks to material fulfillment. And there's nothing actually in the Vedic tradition that says that in and of itself is wrong or not meaningful. So finding material success or creating material success and gathering the wisdom and knowledge necessary to do so is indeed part of life, a vital piece of life. And they call that field of endeavor in the Vedas, they call it aparavidya. That is having the know-how, the knowledge, the wisdom, the use of the technologies that are available to be more successful, to have more abundance, to be more materially fulfilled is indeed part of life and acknowledged as being vital. But the other piece of it is Paravidya, which is essentially the knowledge necessary for spiritual fulfillment. And I mean, we don't have to look very far in our society to really see how you can be materially successful, so to speak. You can have enough. You can have more than enough, and yet be at a loss in terms of real sense of fulfillment and purpose, that your life has deep meaning. I read today that the largest the largest contributor to people dying under the age of 50 is now drug overdoses.
Oh.
And that's in America, specifically in the United States. And that's just, I mean, I got the chills when I read it. It's simply, and we are more abundant. It's not to say that we're all absolutely, we have all our mortgage taken care of and we're free month to month. But the reality is, if we compare what we have to many countries in the world, we see that material success isn't all there is. And so I say that we have to operate on both fields. And in fact, being spiritually successful doesn't mean that you're materially fulfilled either. And being materially fulfilled doesn't mean you're spiritually fulfilled. So therefore, it's really paying attention to both tracks. And that's what my book, for example, and the work of understanding the purpose of life, both from a spiritual standpoint and a material standpoint, are so vital.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And in my experience, because I work a lot with the spiritually evolved, and so do you, with those who've actually dedicated a lot of their awareness, time, attention, money to their own personal evolution and enlightenment experience, and then into the collective, and then sharing that with others. That often the other skill set of material success, and actually where the leverage of their work could come in, are in some ways undermined because of potentially a lack of clarity in this teaching. I mean, or a lack of balance with both tracks?
Well, I think that's really true, and I do think that there is an assumption. And if I were to be very honest, I would think that in my early 20s, when I began yoga in earnest, when I was about 18, 19, and it was to confront, to deal with my own existential challenges, and looking at adulthood probably looming. And thank God I found yoga, but it was probably through at least my mid-20s, even where I was practicing intensely, and I had a teacher, and I was now in my early 20s, already by 23, 24, I was practicing yoga 3 hours a day, and meditation, yoga and meditation 3 hours. And it was only about probably 3 or 4 years later, I realized there was no pose, there was no meditative state that would translate into being out in the world and be successful. That I had to do both works in earnest, that I couldn't just get by on a great backbends, weren't going to bring me creative fulfillment. And meditating for hours on end weren't going to necessarily resolve my fear around relationships. So I had to really, that's really the genesis of the book, of the Four Desires, really came from my own experience, which is we have to be attentive to both. And I do see, the scenario you described, where in the world, I think it happens on both sides of the equation, right? People who lean into spirituality assume, and then are really at a loss for why they're not feeling fulfillment on these other levels, which are more material. And then at the same time, this is kind of the American Western dilemma, materialistic dilemma, which is you get to middle age and you don't have a connection to something beyond the material. And it creates so much of like hitting a wall of emptiness, in essence, and that our life didn't have meaning. So I do honor the fact that spiritual people who lean into spirituality, and that's easier for them. They have spent a lot of time there. They still need to be attentive to this other half of the equation.
Yeah, and I mean it's like there's so many issues with spending too much time on one side and not on much time on the other. I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and people growing small businesses because that's a phase that I'm in my own path with the growing yoga healer community. And so I spend a lot of time with people that have like really gone into business growth and development. And yeah, they hit that point of like, what is it for? And if they lose track of meaning, it's a big problem. And then secondarily, if they haven't spent time developing their physiology, right? I mean, and that's the side that the yogis are so rich in. And the common yoga teacher today who's investing, right? They're investing their weekends and going to workshops, and they're investing their time on the mat, and they're developing a subtle body awareness, and the kind of connection that then has to being able to even sense into purpose.
One of the reasons I think it's even in the introduction to my book, one of the things I say is, look, I pose the question, why should it require that much work to get clear about your purpose? I mean, that book is, it's in depth and it's a process. So I think it's really fair on the part of the reader to justify why you're asking them to do all this work in order to get clear about the purpose. And to your point, there's this issue of yoga is going to provide a level of clarity, and moreover, I'm even going to suggest stillness, that then makes answering those deep questions easier. The answers will gain access to them. There's some stuff, interesting stuff in neuroscience, something I read. So what I was going to say about this field of neuroscience suggests something really interesting, and that is that when we experience even the slightest bit of stress, the brain has two modes of operating. One is called exploitation, the other is exploration. Its natural rhythm is exploring, which means that it has this expansive capacity to create ever more new associations. In other words, the brain is fundamentally a creative organism that is constantly searching out new ideas and new understanding. And that's its normal function. However, when it gets stressed, it's going to go into an exploitation mode, which means that it repeats and utilizes what it already knows. And
it sounds like a samskara.
Right? And in essence, that means that, and what happens is then it goes into this it kind of goes in this circulation route where it just keeps recirculating old information. We keep living from the old pattern. This is at the edge of neuroscience they figured this out. So the point is that, to your point, is through yoga and meditation, we create this stillness that creates this spaciousness in the brain, and there go the opportunity for, breakthrough creativity, totally new paradigms, and we're constantly shifting. We're taking advantage of the brain in that way. So you're right about the physiology and what yoga is offering, in essence. It's the possibility of it. But we still have to have a protocol. We still need to be attentive to, okay, what am I going to do with this spaciousness now that I've created it? As opposed to I did it, now everything's fine. Because the default position will be we'll go back to the old pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of that protocol, I mean, there's to me, I mean, I just want to really ground this conversation in like the reality of we just did this whole launch about asking people about their deeper dreams to help them awaken the experience that the Dharma is something that they can tap into and something they can co-create with. And my coaching team's having a lot of these conversations. And what's really coming up is like people are honestly just too overwhelmed by their day-to-day, what's on their plate, like what's already on their plate when they wake up in the morning, right? Because they haven't developed these practices. They haven't developed a spacious, they're not in right relationship with ether element or air element. Like they're, like that is compressed and busied and potentially toxic. And so how do people start to make that shift into having even a little space to even consider like, oh, my life, there's some purpose that's beyond and that, maybe something's off here and I can actually start to make some changes so that I feel more in alignment with my own experience of life.
Well, I think you asked that, you asked the critical question, which is how does it start to one, there has to be a strong enough desire for it to be different. And the momentum is so powerful these days, Kate. And I feel like, I may be stepping on some toes when I say what I say, but essentially technology is really making it more difficult. Modern technology is making it more difficult to have the level of clarity that is required to successfully navigate this context. Having purpose, having ease, having innovation, stepping out of the old paradigms. We are being crushed by information and bits of unimportant information. And yet you keep layering it into the brain. And now the brain really can't actually work its way into meaningful answers. And you said, we're overwhelmed. Now, partially, life demands a lot, and many families and people, we need two incomes to contribute to a family, and so there's less social contact. There's less, so there's part of that practical reality. But how are we going to make it work within that practical reality? And these technologies of yoga relaxation and meditation and breathing are not just helpful, they're almost going to become a requirement based on the quality of our lives today, for us to stay sane. And not just to survive, but to thrive. And those are two very distinct things in my perception. So I would say that it begins by recognizing that you're not thriving and having some level of desire for it to change, and then being willing to start to introduce modalities that can make it possible for us to return to a level of balance and ease where we can start having the positive inclinations and send us in the right direction. If I could, I'd just say one other thing, and that is, I think it's important, while I made the case that there are two tracks of Paravidya, Aparavidya, this idea of a spiritual path and a worldly path, ultimately, it's my experience, my personal experience, and then teaching over these decades, and that is that they really can't be separate. That fundamentally our life purpose has to come out of our spiritual awareness, our spiritual experience, and ultimately expressing ourselves in the world, whether it's a yoga teacher or an architect or an actor or an attorney, ultimately that we're channeling the Dharma seen through the spiritual vision, or this sense of relaxation and conscience that rises out of quietude. And that's where I think it's really important that we gradually create this realignment. We create pause, we create space, so that we can get clearer about what that might look like.
Yeah, dude. Amen. I'm thankful in my own life. My Dharma brought me from my teen years really heavy into international environmental politics and economics, and then from there into Ayurveda and yoga, and then from there now into entrepreneurship. And I feel very prepared in entrepreneurship because of the yogic practices and the Ayurvedic wisdom of that. But what I notice in terms of the Aparavidya path is like, hot diggity dog, I'm glad I got yoga behind me, because it requires constant evolution. And when I look at like, what is yoga? Like, what is this pursuit of Svatantriya? It's like, there's this constant shape shifting. There's constant skill acquisition. And I go back to the Hindu deities and how they need so many freaking arms because they have so many tools, right? And they all have different tools. And sometimes we need to be this deity and sometimes we need to be that deity, but we need to have the flexibility of personality to be able to be who we need to be next.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, it's something that I'm very personally aware of. It's now time for recalibration for myself. Literally, that's what these days and weeks are right now. Making that time and going, okay, guys, the old paradigm has worked so far really well, but it's not going to work very well in 2 years. And I'm not just talking about my own satisfaction. I mean responsiveness in the world. The world is changing. Therefore, we have to be essentially hear what the next call is, not because something was successful 2 or 3 years ago. So 100%, I couldn't agree with you more. And that it is, that idea of innovating, the important thing, and we keep kind of circling around it. The important thing to understand is it's a natural pattern of the brain. We have our own physiology to assist us in what we're both describing as being really critical to be successful in both ways. As an material entrepreneur, we'll say, in the world, and then kind of in the spiritual path. Even the spiritual path requires innovation and accommodation and adaptation. So staying alert for that, I'm impressed, and I think it's worth mentioning because, you're probably familiar with Wisdom 2.0.
Yes, I went this year.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah. Curious to know how that went. But it's an interesting thing because you see those are the cutting edge, at least in some ways we could say, areas of industry that are at the high end of material success, sponsored by and informed by, and the people that teach there and the people that show up want what's happening there. And in a sense, it is that marriage that we're describing where, and I'm only going to use this word, and it's not a word that's so overused, which is where mindfulness and entrepreneurship and material ambition and creativity and searching for meaning for life all seem to all seem to meet. And, people are asking those questions, and ideally we all are.
Yeah. Yeah. And exploring new ways of collaborating and new ways of like interacting. I mean, it's so cool there because it's so plastic in a way. And my sense is that if we're not asking these questions, we're not in this loop. And it's a really cool loop to be in because it very is much like, okay, there's this deity and they've got a lot of arms and they don't really know what their tools are yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't figure it out alone. We need to actually be figuring it out together. So it's requiring very much new capacities of being able to drop ego, being able to interconnect, being able to see like, hey, who knows the most about this particular part of this? So we can move this piece forward. And then what also is spontaneously arising that we can all sense into and articulate, like name it. And then where does that go? Okay, we'll be back with the second half of the interview where we talk about how your Dharma is not your profession. And don't confuse your Dharma with your profession or it'll make your life way more confusing. And we also get a bit into why it's such a tough day and age to be on purpose and what's going on with vata derangement and ether elements. So stay tuned. Get to know your Vikalpa as well, or that which basically blocks the ray of your Dharma.
You've done some serious work. You're operating at a higher level of consciousness. You know how to take care of your body. You'd like to uplevel other aspects in your life, your space, your time, your Dharma, your flow, and your body. Ether, air, fire, water, earth. I'm taking a posse of peeps into the Awake Living course. 50 people will be selected to join this expedition. We're opening the doors to anyone who is feeling great and wants to uplevel how they align their life. Time optimization, space alignment, hitting goals, wealth expansion, and day-to-day ease. If you're interested in Awake Living, we have a super fun process for you to experience. Go to yogahealer.com/awake. Sign up for your free Awake Living coaching session. During your free Awake Living coaching session, you will refine the next version of you. As a bonus, you'll receive the 60-minute workshop, Insider Scoop on how I optimize my day as a yoga mom, tribe leader, and social entrepreneur. Go to yogahealer.com/awake and sign up for your free Awake Living coaching session.
Yeah. But that's the cutting edge. I mean, that's an exciting, and I think we'd have to say at times scary, but it's certainly an exciting, challenging edge to stay on.
Yeah.
And yet it's really, used, I don't know if everyone who's listening is familiar with the term you use, but Svatantriya is one of the most beautiful and most eloquent ideas there is, which is essentially means self-opinion or self-mastery. And really what you're talking about now, Kate, is that edge of self-mastery. And that's when it gets really exciting. That's when it gets exciting. And invariably, my sense is, unless you're either deliberately trying to hurt people while asking these critical questions, or you're just trying to, or you're willing to deny the fact that what you're going to do is hurt people. If you're asking these questions that you and I are describing, and you're willing to walk toward that edge of self-mastery, of constant innovation and asking these questions, and you do it with kind of honoring the greater good, I am convinced in my stage, and I'm turning 60 this year, so I have a lot of life evidence to say the universe is going to support you.
Yeah.
It's going to support you. And it's not even something you have to fear. And one of the things I really try and make the point in the work as it relates to the marriage of these two worlds, I say, listen, at a certain point, if you really want freedom, live for the purpose, live for living on the edge, because that can never be taken away from you. If you live for the outcome of your efforts, they may never happen, or they may come in, the numbers might be less than you were hoping for. But if you live for the edge of living on that a kind of this existential place where you're constantly challenging yourself and expanding, no one can take that away. And at the same time, I also see that the universe provides, if you at the edge is couched in this idea of working for the greater good.
To me, it speaks to the subtle doshas of the ojas behind the support of the universe, that if we can relax into, and this actually really brings up the second guessing of the Dharma. Like one thing I know, I'm 44, and I have slowly learned to not second guess because of the inefficiencies in it. It's just doesn't do much good anymore. And so part of me is realizing that there's the increase in flow of prana and clarity of tejas. So we have the life force energy, and we have the just the one pointedness of focus that is leading to more light, right? And tejas, and that being able to like kick back into like, hey, the universe has my back. That is, to me, is one of the most ojas nourishing experiences, where the immune field is like, okay, this is cool. Like everything can relax. The root chakra can be grounded. I can be and be, as awake as I am, which I'm sure is incredibly limited, but like as awake as I am, and move forward. And that's that confidence building in that, of just the confidence of the cosmos, the confidence of our subtle physiology aligned with the, hey, I think I want to do this next. I think the community wants to go there next. Who do I need to become for that to go down?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, my grand teacher made spiritual practice very simple. He said the outcome of spiritual practice is more joy and less fear. And I would only add a little bit onto that, and I would say that combined with that is the understanding or the experience that you really are never alone. What you just described, use different language to describe what I think is the same thing. That singular experience that when you drop into deep rest or deep stillness, it's inherently a good place. There's inherently goodness in it. There's a beneficence to it, right? And that's not a small thing. That's about as big a thing as it gets. And the idea then that when I relax, I'm surrounded by beneficence, despite all of the appearance to the contrary on my feed and CNN and whatever at MSNBC and Fox News, all that stuff, despite all appearances to the contrary, when I relax, what's there is goodness, and what's there is support. And that's why I say, the experience that I'm never alone. And then by extension, it's what you just described, which is you get to relax more, and you get to have less fear, and you get to feel supported in decisions in which you live for the greater good. Out of the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad says this. It says, if you always nurture Dharma, Dharma will always nurture you.
Amen. I mean, again, it's like this is so my lived experience, and there's so much risk taking to the egoic self, right? I mean, the risk, it's what the ego perceives as risk, and the more I notice, oh, my ego's perceiving this as risk, I'm like, oh, sweet, I'm totally on the right track.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like that indicator of that edginess of tapas or discomfort, or like where the Dharma is expanding. So can we talk about this? Because there's this sense, I find when people are overwhelmed, especially when like yoga students start to wake up to the concept of Dharma, and I think that there's like this one life purpose. One of the things that I notice is that it's very much a chapter by chapter experience that I feel like I'm co-authoring or co-creating with the divine, and by simply just breaking it down, like whenever anything seems too big, I just try to break it down into a sub chapter. Like,
right.
What is it right in front of me, and where is the desire, the deeper desire leading and yearning, and then the secondary of like, who do I need to become to do that? So what's your experience of that? And it, particularly like just the next phase or chapter of your life, you talked about this restructuring, and it seems like you're like, okay, the disruption of it's like we kind of need to be disrupting the current marketplace if we're actually perceiving what's next.
Right. Well, the first thing I think we should do, and I think, given the content, given the subject of our conversation today, I think it's really important that I share what I think is a critical distinction that people have to make in light of Dharma. And that is that people make Dharma the equivalent of profession. In other words,
right.
It's really not what I do. It's not what I do. It's not how I make a living. That's not my Dharma. My Dharma is expressed through what I do, but it's also being expressed professionally, but it's also being expressed as who I show up as a parent, how I show up as a friend, how I show up as as I show up as a citizen, how I show up as a dog owner. So the point being that to get clear about Dharma, it's not like Dharma changes. From my experience, my understanding of the rendering of the teachings around Dharma, and that is that your Dharma is your Dharma. You're born with Dharma, but how it will manifest through the course of your life, and that's what, I like your illustration of chapters. It'll be different chapters, My Dharma was 30 years ago to teach a lot of group classes. I almost teach none now, almost no group classes now. Has my Dharma changed? No. How it's been expressed has changed. And the point is that I could feel my Dharma reaching an end in the, and that's what I was talking about, and sensing and trying to orchestrate consciously the transition to what is this next phase, and what is the material I need to bring that needs to come through. And luckily that has kind of come through with a lot of clarity. But so the point is, we're not stuck being the attorney Dharma or then the yoga teacher Dharma, or the point is that your Dharma is it's better to figure out what that ray is. I describe it as a ray, as almost like what in the tantric tradition is called kala. And a kala means this distinct ray of divinity. And so you have this big idea, but like you were saying, that divinity has a bunch of arms and has different potentialities. And some tradition has 1,000 different names, and each one of those names describes a different, unique, profound quality, sublime quality. So which arm is going to be used at a given time? It's still the same ray being used in a different expression.
Yeah.
And as long as I stay alert to the ray, and once I've identified it, I can't say enough for the value of that. And then also identifying, which is kind of the cornerstone, I think, of my book, is that you almost want to figure out what your default ray is that's dysfunctional.
Amen. Oh my gosh.
You want to really, it's vital that we don't just pay attention to the light, but really, what is this darkness that keeps us, like you said, if I'm going to actually be honoring the kind of soul's call through this, I'm going to be challenging my ego's level of comfort at various times. And when I do, that's a good sign. But what is that? Give that a name, what that fear is, or what that sabotage desire, kind of what we call vikalpa, is. And, what is this thought construct you have? And by giving it a name, you then can see how it cycles back up in a default way. Left to its own devices, it'll just seize you, and it'll try and take control. One of the things I tell people is that, and that is that, in essence, when we try and break cycles, when we try and grow, when we make the effort to grow, and we begin the process of actually taking those steps for change, the old version of us will begin to lose its definition. By virtue of stepping into a new you, the old you is now starting to become less valued, less important. It's getting less love, less attention. And guess what it's going to do? It's actually going to grab you with more ferocity. And there's going to be more temptation to be the old you than there was when you weren't pushing that limit. And that's why it's challenging. That's why we're challenged. So I think if we understand those things, give it a name, both the positive and the negative ray, and then understand that as you change, the old you is going to want to grab you more than ever. It's actually, you're going to find some dysfunctional friend to take you back there, or you're going to just wake up, somewhere where you shouldn't be, or there's just going to be a bunch of ice cream in your hand when you're going to sleep at night. Something will be grabbing you, and or TV or shopping or chocolate or whatever it is. So that speaks to it. And just be open. And Dharma is not profession. Dharma is 100 incarnations, but it's one Dharma. Just many incarnations.
Yeah. There's a few things in there with the in a lot of like entrepreneur speak, like the breakdown before the breakthrough. The breakdown is that ego sabotage of like gonna grab you, and a lot of people don't actually make it through to the breakthrough. What I find at higher levels of pushing, not of pushing, but of just to me it feels much more collaborative than pushing, but there's a sense of efforting and identity evolution that needs to occur for the breakthrough. And many people get stuck. They get stuck at that place of they fall back, and then they and whether that means their impact planes off to about the same impact. We can see this a lot with yoga teachers, right? Where they're going to work with the same 100 people every month, right? And it's a lot of their students aren't really progressing. It's just they're nurturing the relationship, which has that has a good to it, but it might not be the breakthrough of their Dharma, right? To go.
Right.
I see this a lot. And this isn't an industry that's inherently moving towards freedom, right? Let alone the other industries that are more limiting towards, whether it's just wealth accumulation that leads to more spending. Often we see that a lot when people start to just make more money, they spend more money, and then they actually increase their debt, and
Right.
they have less time and less money overall. But on the outside, it looks like, right, it looks so much better. But there's really, to me, there's not that many people, percentage wise, that are really going through breakthrough after breakthrough. They go to one breakthrough and then they get comfortable, and then they're like, okay, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is comfortable. I don't have to actually change who I am now. And I'll do my practice, but they start to compartmentalize their practices from this path of the ever evolving, experience. So I'd love to hear, I know we've got to go soon, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think what you're describing reminds me of the idea that a lot of us continue to do what we're good at, not what we need to do. And we're good at it. We're established at it. I often tell newer yoga teachers, for example, that, look, supposedly, the understanding is every 7 years you have 99% new cells in your body. So if you change your diet and you exercise, 7 years later, there's all your cells are going to reflect that, not your diet previous to that, right? So I use that model, that paradigm, and say, look, every 7 years you have to reinvent yourself. I mean, how long will you be fulfilled teaching vinyasa? It takes 5 years of practice and a couple of years in teacher training, and then you do it. Then what? And then let me ask you a question. What percentage of you is being used? What percentage of your intelligence, your creativity, your innovation, and how fulfilling is it really to continue to teach what you did 7 years ago? So you have to find a new paradigm. Maybe it's classes to workshops. Maybe it's classes to writing. Maybe it's classes to podcasts. I'm not anywhere in your world, even approaching how, the quality of specificity you give to people, and my sense of that you really describe, this is the part of the terrain you're describing. But we have a tendency to fall into this, what we're good at, as opposed to really what we have the need to grow at. And I would just say that typically what we're good at, we probably found some measure of success in. And we have to take a little bit, we have to start to challenge that. And that will be taking a certain level of risk in order to expand it. And one of the other things to say before we're done is really, in this context, this is really describing not just the brain, which we talked about the physiology of the brain earlier, innovation versus exploitation, but it's really the message one should understand, the kind of imperative of the soul. The soul is inherently perfect, and yet has come with this, come into form as your body, personality, in order to express itself and fulfill and discharge duty, in essence. And a lot of people go, wait a minute, that sounds like mutually contradictory ideas. One, it's perfect, but two, it has a mission to kind of discharge some stuff and kind of contribute to this thing that we're all a part of, right? I'm a part in this each are a part in this whole. One of the things how I describe that is we're each note in the symphony of creation. And the idea is you got to play the note. Now, how the note plays and how it plays, what part of the symphony it is, first, second, or third, or fourth movement, the rhythm will change, the speed will change, all of that will change. But the point is, your soul is already fulfilled, and yet it has a longing to accomplish and to express itself. And taking ownership of that kind of swings us back to stuff that we talked about earlier, which is you relax, there's this feeling of being supported. That's this kind of perfection and wholeness and ease and joy inherent in the soul. And yet, even it's not driven like this idea of the starving, drug-addled writer or artist. It actually can express itself fully from health. It doesn't have to be disabled or drunk or suffering in order to express itself. It can actually be radiantly full and joyous, and it's just as passionate about providing growth for itself in the world of which it's a part.
And way more functional.
Yeah, and you can live longer and functional, and you can even make the case that there have been some amazing artists who are under the influence or whatever, but in terms of your alignment with the greater good, with Dharma, and let's never forget that the Vedic teachings suggest that if you live a successful life and you're not aligned with your individual Dharma, you won't be happy. Doesn't matter how successful you are. And if you live a reasonably successful life and you're aligned with Dharma, you will be. The basis of it is serving that edge of self-mastery, serving that edge of asking those questions and answering them with living your life in the best way possible.
Yeah, what he said. And it's going to be messy, right? I mean, it's like you're going to scrape your knees, and it's this constant learning process. And yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Rod, such a blast to speak with you. I'd love to talk with you again some point about what is your 2-year disruption. I'd love to hear the details of that on the show.
More to come.
But just
it'll already come to fruition if we wait too long. It'll already be out of the world.
And we'll reschedule right away. Everyone, this has been Rod Stryker, Para Yoga. Thank you so much, Rod. And again, his book is 4 Desires.
Thank you. Thanks for the work you do. Thank you. I think in terms of people really advancing in meditation, people who maybe are coming into it now as opposed to 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I don't know that they have a fighting chance to get to these like deeper plateaus. I don't. And that's why Yoga Nidra, it's like just lie down, people, and let me lead you to a place that create a physiological response that actually leads you to that place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, and just what you're saying about innovation in the teachings, it's like things we've got. I mean, we're not dealing with normal human physiologies in any way, shape, or form anymore. I mean, with the level of toxicity in food and obesity and all the other stuff, it's like it's definitely a whole new ball game out there.
Do you know that in the ancient tradition, in Sankhya, the sense of which is the most intense pollution, the most harmful pollution?
I would guess it was ether or subtle level.
Sound.
Yeah,
it's ether. It's sound. It's sound pollution is the most. And just think about how much sound pollution we're exposed to. And that is just the nonsense that we actually hear. Yeah. So. Awesome.
All right. We'll pick it up whenever you want to come back. I'll let my gal know whenever you want to talk about Yoga Nidra here.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rod. Oh my goodness. Wasn't that wonderful? Thank you, Rod. All right, up next week we have, actually up this Thursday, is Alexandria Crow. Some of you might know her as the hardtail model. At least I did. I was like, oh, that's who you are. She's truly so cool to hang out with. And so we did a show on evolving your yoga practice and your yoga teaching. That is this Thursday. And next Monday, YouTube yogini Cassandra Reinhardt, who's got like a zillion YouTube followers, and she's really into yin yoga and moon cycle empowerment. And so we do this show. It's kind of a funny show. I can't wait to hear what you guys all think about it, because I've taught women in moon cycle classes for years, like literally for like 15 years. And so we kind of go at it at the women in moon cycles, and I challenge some of the things she says and try to move the conversation deeper. It's a spicy conversation, and you will learn a lot because she knows a lot, and we have a fun little banter on women and moon cycle empowerment. Check it out next week. And in closing, I just want to send a little love into our Yoga Healer Real Life Show audience. You guys make it so real for me, and I hear again and again from the people that do all our coaching sessions with those who apply for the courses that you guys are awesome. And it's really all about the podcast listeners. And I'm so glad you share the show. I'm so glad you're part of it. I'm so glad you talk about this stuff with the peeps in your life. And we are a current of change in the world. So go get them, tigresses.
Yoga Healer Real Life Show with Kate Stillman. Yoga Healer.